Well, hello and welcome to our final session together in the book of Proverbs. We have spent the last several weeks talking about the various themes and motifs in the book of Proverbs that are applicable for us in our everyday. What does it mean to live a life of wisdom? Wisdom, skill, and the art of godly living, that it's a lifetime journey in this way, that ultimately we look to Jesus as the true wisdom of God as we seek to follow him in our daily decisions. In the book of Proverbs, we have just scratched the surface. We've talked about how this applies in our relationships and our friendships, what this looks like with our possessions and our wealth, what it looks like as well as we consider how to use and guard our tongue in ways that honor and glorify him. And today we want to end our series talking about the treasure and the gift of sexuality, of our sexual intimacy in marriage, how this is something that is a key theme in the book of Proverbs. Remember, the book of Proverbs, at least in the first several chapters, are written from the perspective of Solomon as he is writing to his son, as a father would to his child that he is trying to train up. And one of the various themes that he's going to cover with his child, his son, is what it means to honor God in your relationships. Now listen, while that is the kind of general overlap of how it is being presented in the text, there's applicable themes whether you're a son or a daughter, right? How do we honor God in our relationships? And we talked about the key theme here, especially in Proverbs chapter 5. But I believe as well for the whole of Proverbs and how they approach this topic. It's that we are to treasure and safeguard God's gift of sexual intimacy in marriage. That we are to treasure and safeguard God's gift of sexual intimacy in marriage. How this is such a theme that is so exploited in our world today, a commodity often of exploitation in the world, a temptation that even as Christians we could fall into very simply and very quickly. How do we treasure and safeguard sexual intimacy in the ways that God loves and designs and desires for us? This is something that the church has not always done a good job, not our church, but the church in general has not always done a good job in being willing to address, not being willing to talk about and talk through. And we're going to talk about some of those temptations here in a second. But this is something that the world does very flippantly, oftenly, and we get pulled into it. How do we as followers of God have as God's ideal the treasure and the safeguarding of sexual intimacy in a way that is truly God glorifying and satisfying? One of the lies of the world, one of the lures of the devil is that you could do what you want in this area and be happy. But the truth is, when you go down those paths, that happiness is not what you find. It's despair often. And that if we set apart God's ideal, God's design from the very beginning in this way, and seek to honor him with our bodies and with the intimacy of our souls with others in this way, then we are setting ourselves apart to find true joy and happiness after him. And so, once again, that's the theme, treasure and safeguard God's gift of sexual intimacy in marriage. But the verses that I wanted to share with you that talk about it, here's Proverbs 5, verses 15 to 18. Listen to what Solomon is sharing here. He says, "Drink water from your own cistern, water flowing from your own well. Should your springs flow in the streets and streams in the public squares? They should be for you alone and not for you to share with strangers. Let your fountain be blessed and take pleasure in the wife of your youth." This is the challenge. Drink from your own cistern. We discussed it some on Sunday, how in the ancient world, oftentimes having access to water was a commodity that was valued and prized. Look in the book of Genesis as the various scenes and stories unfold about opportunities for there to be a well that would supply sustenance for your family, how often there was warring over it. And this is a reminder here that the proverb is sharing, that men and women, that we are to only drink of the cistern that God has given to us. This is the metaphor, that in the marriage bond, in the husband and wife relationship, that is the place where God has called us to enjoy and treasure and safeguard sexual intimacy. It's really an opportunity for us to love our neighbor as ourself. That's what we talked about. It's the golden rule, actually. In verse 16, he says, should your springs flow into the streets? In other words, the metaphor, should you want your spouse to water other people, to be there in the streets? No, you wouldn't want that. You would want it to be used in ways that only bring refreshment to yourself. And so as you would want others to treat you, so treat them. As you would want your wife or your husband to treat you, so treat them and take pleasure in them. It's a beautiful picture that God gives us of commitment, of love, of intimacy in the marriage bond. This is God's ideal, to treasure and safeguard sexual intimacy in the marriage relationship. Now, we talked about the fact that while this is the ideal, oftentimes many of us have a different story about how this has played out in our life. Perhaps some of us that are watching this video have been abused and have seen sexuality distorted. And there needs to be healing, and there needs to be confession on the hands of the perpetrators, and there needs to be a process. I believe that that's something that you need to pursue. That you maybe need help and counsel to shape your mind around the ideals that God has set for you. I don't want to talk about it in a flippant way. That is serious and beyond the ability on just a video teaching series to get into the depths of how we process that. But those were evils that were perpetrated, that we believe God could bring about healing when we come to him over time and get counsel and support. There are others of us that maybe have a past where we have chosen, whether believer or non-believer, to drink of cisterns that God did not desire for us, whether before marriage or even during marriage. And oftentimes we carry with that some shame, some guilt. And we want to come before God with our shame and our guilt and repent and find forgiveness, confession. The road oftentimes towards finding healing in this area and is a long road. It's one that we need to embrace, one that we need to be honest with our spouse and with our significant spouses and others that God has placed in our life on this journey to come alongside and be honest. Some of us need to do that. But whether you have that sort of past or not, God's grace is there. God's forgiveness is there. God's compassion is there when we confess and when we find wholeness, or when we come to him and ask that God might heal places that have been broken, what we did not choose in our own life. Don't be ashamed, whatever your history is here. Don't be ashamed. In the garden, we see that scene in Genesis 3:10 where Adam and Eve eat of the fruit and then they realize what they have done. And when God comes to speak and be with them like he was accustomed to do, they hide. And remember what they say? We heard your voice and we were ashamed because we were naked and we hid. We realized our sinful choices. And so this shame caused us to hide. And I believe in this area, especially in our life, that's a dangerous step. Don't hide. Find help. Confession. Go to the Lord. Go to counseling. Go to other people that could help you. Come, make your way through and find healing in this way. God has set this ideal up. We often, because of innocently being abused and evil against us, or whether through our own sinful choices, have chosen ways that aren't honoring God in this way, God, I believe, still brings about healing. And God is always offering grace. Yes, it is a gift, that sometimes there's shame and guilt because of the ways we've chose to go about it, but that God always offers grace and forgiveness and help. You can't do it on your own. Look for help. Go for counsel. Reach out to us as a church. We have counselors and resources that we'd love to give you to help you process and work through these things in your own life, and to see marriages become strong, to see husbands and wives loving each other and encouraging each other in this way. It's God's treasure. It is God's gift to us to be safeguarded and loved and cared for. I want to encourage you as well, be thinking about the ways that you are filling your mind with images and thoughts that do not bring hope and healing, but that bring further manipulation and despair and sadness. The things that we watch on TV, the conversations we have, all these things filter into our mind expectations that aren't always aligned with God's. And be careful of this. Some of us need to cut off these avenues in our life quickly, very soon. And then also I want to just challenge you with this idea of silence. versus dialogue. Especially for parents and with our kids, we need to be in conversation with them from a young age on these things. I want to encourage you to do that in a healthy way at age-appropriate levels. So there's so many resources available that help you think about how to have these conversations with your kids as well. We need to do that. They are being exposed to it in the world around them already. We need to show them God's ideal and God's calling and how God has created them and how God desires for them to follow him in this way in their life. Don't be silent. Make sure you're taking an active role in the life of your kids in this way as well. This is one of the key themes we see throughout all of Proverbs. In fact, we see throughout all of the scriptures as well, that God desires of us hearts that are set after him in this way. That sexual desire is a natural part of being human, but that God desires for us to act upon it in ways that are honoring to him. And that is to treasure it and to safeguard it in the marriage relationship. And that is God's ideal. That is where God will bless. That is where we will find most fulfillment, where we have fallen short or where we have struggles in our life because of what has happened to us in the past. We need to either confess and have God renew us, or we need to find hope and healing and counsel to make it through. And always we look to God for his grace. We look to God for his grace, that none of us are perfect, that we need to humbly talk about this topic because all of us could be tempted in ways like this. And we need to trust God to be with us in the midst of it. So I want to challenge you as a church, challenge you individually. These are hard conversations, but important ones to have. And I want you to lift up, as I want to lift up for myself, the idea of following after God and treasuring this gift and safeguarding it in ways that honor him and love my spouse. And that's my prayer for us as a church as well. Once again, we want to be here for you. No matter your journey here, no matter your story, no matter where you are along in this spectrum of responsibility and experiences, we want to be there for you to help you process and to find hope and healing and purpose, and reach out to us. We have many, many resources and counselors available that could be there for you and be there for your relationships as you seek to honor God in this way in your life. I've enjoyed having this series with you in Proverbs. We've really just scratched the surface. I want to encourage you, get in the Proverbs every day. There's a lifetime of gleaning of wisdom that you could find in these words. Take time to trust God, to be wise in your life, and to follow him. You will not be disappointed.